drive you insane.
No, I don't want to do this every week. No, it's nice to do it once a month, but it's exactly the time that. Okay, so starting.
Is this okay for my background here?
It's good.
The door.
And I think we are live. I'm just gonna check. I think we're live.
Yay!
Perfect. We're live.
Great.
We got together. Okay. Good evening, everybody. If you are watching us live, my name is David Kalhous, and I'm the director of the Prague Piano Festival. This is the Prague Piano Webcast, the 5th edition of the Prague Piano Webcast. And, yes, and the first one in 2021. So let's all hope for a better year. I would like to again welcome my friend and co-conspirator Jihye Chang.
Hey, hello.
Who is going to moderate the discussion from Florida. She's a great pianist, teacher, and always has great questions to ask our guests. So it's great to have you. And of course, most importantly, our guest VEDRANA Subotic. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for being with us. Because I know you are extremely busy. You wear so many hats as a pianist and teacher and artistic director of a festival, and so it's really great to be with you and to talk with you about some of your activities. Maybe we can just start asking the most obvious thing. How are you coping? How has COVID changed your life? Has it changed your life in a significant way? Because of course, for musicians, this has been a difficult period of time. So how are you?
I'm well, thank you. And I can't complain too much. The only thing that has really significantly changed for me is my ability to travel. And I greatly miss being able to get to other places, especially my beloved Europe. And one of my favorite places there is Prague, and it has been a while since I've been to the city and been able to feed my soul with its beauty and art and the music scene. So in that respect, COVID has obviously put a damper on my activities. But in terms of finding things to do, I have managed somehow to keep myself busy with various projects, and some of them have taken off in unexpected ways, despite what would have been maybe frustrations and frustrated moments. It's been really exciting. I'm looking forward to sharing some of that with you and the viewers.
I should actually mention that VEDRANA was the first guest that Joel Hastings and I brought to Prague Piano Festival, and we didn't call it Prague Piano Festival back then. I don't know if you remember. We used to call it many different things, but I remember it was in 2015, and it was just the three of us, and we had maybe about 18 students total. I remember, you brought with you also some string players, so we also had chamber music, which was a lot of fun. But I did actually look up, some of our old programs. I remembered, that time really flies, and it was really wonderful because it was really the first year of the Prague Piano Festival when it really started growing. Because before that, it was mostly like a little retreat, for students that Joel brought and I brought, But I think, with you, the thing really expanded, So we really hold a very unique place in the history of the Prague Piano Festival. Of course. You have a very impressive bio. I know I was kind of reading and I was texting with Jihye back and forth, because we were thinking about questions to ask you. Of course, you are a professor of piano at the University of Utah. You have your own festival. You're director of the Intermezzo concert series in Salt Lake City. You have a couple of executive positions in American List Society, in the World Piano Association. You're a Steinway artist. You play a lot, you teach a lot. Maybe we can start at the very beginning, because I'm very curious, because you are of course European. You left very early, Europe, if I understand. But you still managed to basically like finish your formal studies there. So I just wanted to ask you about your musical beginnings in former Yugoslavia. I know you went to the National Music Conservatory in Belgrade. what was it like? And I don't just mean musically, but what was it like culturally growing up there at that time?
Well, it was incredibly wonderful, and I miss it greatly. Perhaps our viewers may not be aware, but shortly after I left, there was a civil war in former Yugoslavia, and the country broke apart. It used to be a combination of smaller states, something like a miniature federation of states. And before I left, it was a vibrant, very active artistic scene. I remember there was something like 44 theaters in the city of Belgrade where I went to school. But my beginnings were as a musician were quite humble and unexpected. My kindergarten teacher pointed out to my parents that maybe I have some talent because I could hold a tune. And so being the first child, my parents were probably a little overzealously proud of me and took me in to be evaluated for my music studies at the National Conservatory. And, the rest just kind of went by in a flash. I was admitted, and at the time I was the youngest student to attend. And that was the story of my admission to the Academy of Music at the age of 15. So I spent 10 years studying for a degree, conservatory degree, and then went on to what in the United States is addressed as undergraduate degree, and then onward to graduate degrees. And once there were no more degrees, I guess I had to get a job. And so I think I would have happily stayed in school. I envy all of my students all the time that they can be in school and continue to learn.
So I'm just curious, studying at the National Music Conservatory, because Jihye and I we talk about this quite a bit, about the focus, because she went to Seoul National, and I went to the Prague Conservatory and to the Academy, and we always talk about the fact how very piano focused our studies our studies were. So I'm wondering if your experience was similar, playing piano at the expense of pretty much everything else.
Yes and no. I mean, you're right, the European conservatory education is very instrument centric, and everyone is studying to be a soloist. As a matter of fact, I don't know if one of my friends and students is watching this, but she's preparing to go into a doctoral program, and she went to the St. Petersburg Conservatory. And then she said that after she graduated, she's a phenomenal pianist, and she quit playing the piano for a few years afterwards because she said, well, I wasn't going to win the Tchaikovsky competition. So clearly, I shouldn't be a pianist.
What's the point, right?
What's the point, right, if I'm not going to be the winner of the Tchaikovsky competition? And so that just reminded me of that conservatory culture in Europe where you're just studying to be the best in the world all the time, whatever that means. And who knows, at age 15 or 16, does anyone really know what that means, right? So but besides piano, and I have to say, one of the odd things about being a student of the conservatory program there is I never played any chamber music. You can tell from my resume and my activities, I'm a huge chamber music fan, and play a lot. And it was a discovery for me when I actually came to the United States as a graduate student, because my first scholarship to a graduate program included being they called it an assistant in accompanying. So I was charged with basically being a staff pianist for the school where I went to, and that introduced me to the world of chamber music. And I loved it so much, I couldn't get enough. So that was definitely one thing that didn't happen during my conservatory studies. But I also had wonderful memories of other classes, such as the very last year of my conservatory studies, we had musicology, a class in musicology, and it was taught by a woman who was sight impaired. She was practically completely blind, and she was an incredible professor. And we studied the Ring cycle, Wagner's Ring cycle, the entire last year of my conservatory training. And it was incredibly fun and wonderful. And so I have lots of vivid memories like that from my conservatory training that had nothing to do with piano, but gave me impetus and momentum and food for thought. And for that, I'm very, very grateful. I think to have a ability to have a situation where you are educated in different environments and in different places and in different cultures really provides for a broader perspective as a musician and better understanding when teaching, about students who come from different backgrounds. And it teaches us to be more flexible and have a variety of perspectives.
What about pianistically, technically? Did you feel that when you came to the US, you were actually ready as a pianist, ready for the graduate studies? I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the repertoire you have learned still in Europe. Do you feel like, you were at the age of 19, 20, I don't want to say complete, but do you feel like you were actually ready to take on the musical world?
Well, did I really know what that means at the age of 18 or 19? I highly doubt it. I certainly was met with kindness and appreciation for my training and my abilities when I auditioned for an undergraduate degree in music at Michigan State University, where I first came as an international student due to my family situation, which is also an interesting component of my piano studies, and it has to do with nuclear physics. As I auditioned there, I didn't speak English practically at all. I learned English when I was 15, and I had just come out of the academy audition where the two phases of the audition were technical audition, where we had to play scales and etudes and things like that. And then if you passed that round, it was like a competition. You were allowed to come back and present your repertoire. And part of the technical audition actually also included Bach preludes and fugues. So the committee wanted to see whether we had the chops and whether we had the memory, understanding, and so I was super well prepared for that audition. And we came to United States, and I didn't speak any English, and the committee, but I wanted to continue my studies, and I was very young. I was 15, having just graduated from high school, and so I was perfectly eligible, but super young. And the professors at Michigan State University wanted to hear me play, and they asked me for a scale, and I sat down and I played, I don't know, D major scale or whatever, and it was in a big concert hall, and so they were kind of shouting at me, from the seats. And I was pretty nervous because, again, I didn't speak any English, foreign country, I don't know these people, I'm young. And then they said, can you play this scale? And I played that scale. And then they said, can you play this scale? And so this went on for a while. And we finally stopped at the E flat melodic sixth in contrary motion. And that was like the last request. And I played it. And my feeling was, oh no, I'm terrible. I will never be admitted. I'm just a terrible pianist. They keep asking me to play scales because clearly at 160, not fast enough for this discerning faculty. And they, as I found out afterwards, they were just having great old time because they were like, hey, can you play that scale? And hey, can you play that scale? So so kind of yes and no, I guess the answer to your question. I didn't really know what to expect, and I was very thoroughly trained and very dedicated as a young pianist, and continued to practice 7-8 hours a day every day of my undergraduate studies.
Wow!
When I was a conservatory student, I had made a commitment to myself that I would average 5 hours a day.
See, I did that until high school. And then I got a little lazy in undergrad. That's the difference, I think, between all our guests and myself, because I think I was burned out because I was so focused on getting into the good school, at the highest record, whatever possible. But anyways, can I ask a question, David, just about your teachers at the conservatory? Did you study with one or multiple, and where were they trained? How does that affect how you are as a pianist?
So, like I said, when I was in the conservatory, I started at the. So just to explain to the viewers, we have the school, which is called a conservatory music school, which is pre-college training, and then we have the big conservatory, which is like a university, right? So we call it conservatory from both sides.
So that's where you started when you were 15. That's the bigger one as a young student. Is that right?
So, yeah, very confusing. I feel like I must be 200 years old, because to get to the point when I was 19 takes, hours of explanations. So I first started at the school for gifted children. They call it these days. And my first piano teacher, and the only teacher with whom I studied, passed away the summer of my graduation. So I had never studied with anyone else, just one teacher, and she was, like my second parent. And so she actually had a heart attack, and while she was vacationing with us, with my family, and I, an Adriatic Sea, and that was quite traumatic. And then shortly after that, we moved to United States. So I had auditioned at the conservatory, the State Conservatory in Belgrade, and I should have gone there. But because my family suddenly moved to United States at Michigan State University, I ended up studying with Ralph Bodopek, who was one of those voices that were coming out of, the concert hall saying, "Hey, can you play, D flat major thirds, and contrary motion, whatever." So, and Ralph was a wonderful teacher, and a very active concert pianist. He was the very first winner of the Van Cliburn piano competition. And, took that position in Michigan State kind of soon thereafter, and raised a family. He was a very humble and very unassuming person, and just a fantastic pianist. And he just, I think, wanted to have a life, instead of just concertizing, tour around, and wanted to dedicate time to his family. And so he was lucky for me in East Lansing, Michigan, where Michigan State University is. So I ended up studying with him for a couple of years, and then we went back to former Yugoslavia, where I continued my studies with a Russian teacher.
Okay.
And I studied with him for another 2 years, and he was also a phenomenal teacher. Certainly someone who taught me. Perhaps the most important thing that he taught me is that there are no limits. There are no limits. It's only our imagination that holds us back as musicians. So I'm grateful to him for that. Did your regular competition route and whatnot, won some stuff. And 2 years later, Ralph Bodopek at Michigan State said, "Well, hey, if you want to come back for graduate studies, we'd be happy to have you, and work on a scholarship for you." And that was a time when things started to kind of fall apart in former Yugoslavia. And my parents were happy to, be able to, send me somewhere where they felt would be safe and where I could continue my studies. And so I landed back at Michigan State with Ralph, where I did my master's. And then when came time for graduate school auditions, I went to a couple of places that I had heard of. You have to remember, this was before everything was available on the internet, and it was so easy to meet people and find out who's where. And it seems very odd, especially when I teach my university classes. I don't know if you ever tell your students, "Hey, internet started in 1996. It hasn't been like 100 years." We've done all of us have had the benefit of one-click access to information. So I had, among other teachers that I had kind of investigated, it was all word of mouth, really, with students that I knew and colleagues. Menachem Pressler's name came up repeatedly, and my teacher, Ralph Bodopek, knew him and knew of him, and thought that he would be a great match for me for my musical development. And so I ended up taking an audition in Indiana University Jacobs School of Music. And um, the rest is history. I ended up doing an artist diploma there first and then a doctorate.
Yay, who's here? I went to IU.
No way!
Yay. Yeah.
Nice to meet you, fellow
Nice
Hoosier.
to meet you. Yes, yeah. I was happy to read. I was studying your bio and all the wonderful things that you're doing, and I just saw, oh, she went to IU. It's just so great to meet another person who went.
You just love IU. I know people who never leave, who have never
Right,
left.
yeah. It's very easy to just be there, for a long time. It's very
First
tempting.
itself, yes, I absolutely loved
Yes.
my studies there.
So I was
Yeah.
wondering before we get into the IU stuff, which and I think now we should talk about it because I think you study with the same teachers, and I would love to hear some of your impressions. Maybe we should listen to some music because we have been talking for a while. So I thought maybe we could start with the Beethoven. Vedrana, would it be okay?
Whatever you like.
Do you want to say a few words about your Beethoven project? Because that's something that
it probably won't be a few words.
Okay, so you know what, we are gonna listen first, and then maybe we can continue with the IU stuff and get into the Beethoven.
Yeah.
Okay, so this will be an excerpt from Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto in G major. we could play the whole concerto, but maybe we should continue with our talk.
Okay.
And so this is of course part of your Beethoven project, which we'll probably get to in a minute. But maybe Jihye can continue interviewing you about your time at IU and about Chibok and about your other teachers, because I think that's a really fascinating period in American pianist life in general.
I agree.
Well,
Yeah.
but I think by the timeline of things, it seems that you were there before me, and what people refer as like the golden age of IU, because I just got the end of it. I studied with Shebok for a year and a half, and he passed away. And there still was, Mr. Håkansson was there, and Dr. Brown was there. So I got to see a lot of really just amazing people, not just in performing area, but also in the musicology and music theory and history. Everybody was just amazing. But I just wonder how it was. Was Mr. Gingold alive?
Mr. Gingold, so I worked with him during my artist diploma, and then he passed away just as I was starting my doctorate. So I had a couple of years of, where I played weekly in his studio, because I was in a chamber group with violinists from his studio, and I still play chamber music with people from his studio.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
IU is really one of those places where 6 degrees of separation between musicians. Someone went to IU.
Yes. It's a big place too. Yeah.
And when were you there? I mean, so you studied with Shebok, and I worked with him for a little bit. He was so, these people were so busy with their concertizing careers that they had very little time beyond just, being there and teaching their students in their studio. And but Georgi Shebok, he, was one of huge influences on my piano playing, and I'm sure, so many people who studied with him. When I was there, besides taking, doing his private lessons, he also very kindly taught master classes every week.
The fifth floor master class, right?
Yes, that's right. And not a very big room, and just with students. And that was one of the things I remember most fondly about Indiana universities, that the opportunities for learning were enormous. You could any day go and learn from a top level musician in any field, and the access was free. So it really was a universe of music, like a little world.
Right. And that's just something that I didn't know how amazing that was, back when I was actually there with all these amazing people. Stacker was alive, and Mr. Gooley was there, and so you could just go sit in these master classes for free. But it was the first time that I was away from my family, so I was also busy just taking care of myself, doing laundry and things like that. And so that's just something that I just feel like, oh my God, I had no idea how much great stuff was going on. And I wish I had taken more advantage of it. But I mean, it was really great. And so you studied with Mr. Pressler. So I'm just curious, is there any difference that you experienced, from your early training and then the Russian teacher and Votapek and Pressler, like how they approach their pedagogy, so to speak?
Well, yes and no.
Right.
My experience with Mr. Vodopek was kind of rooted in Russian pianistic tradition, because he studied with Joseph and Rosina Levine at Juilliard. So that was, his training and his school of playing. And when I came to IU, Mr. Pressler, who was born in Germany, and lived there. And he was also um, brought up trained in this kind of. It's kind of funny to think of Mr. Pressler as being brought up, because he seems to have always been, a wise old man who could just dole out wisdom about piano playing all his life. It's hard to imagine that he was 20 at some point in his life. We had such reverence for him as students. So I would say that there was a similarity across the board in their approach to sound making and to technique, and I wasn't too distracted trying to integrate different ways of playing. But I do think that again, being able to study in such a diverse school such as Indiana, and to have that European training, and then to come to the United States and study with an American teacher who was trained in Russian school, and then with Mr. Pressler, and I took lessons with Mr. Hokinson for a few times, and I don't think Michel Bloch was alive when you were there, was he? French pianist who came second to Maurizio Pollini in the Chopin competition, and then I worked with Mr. Schebach as well quite a bit, and he was so philosophical. And so having all those kind of Hungarian and Russian traditions, I think, is how I would describe my pianistic background. And yeah, I spent a year at Yale, post graduate studies, where I worked with Peter Frankel, who is Hungarian. So I'd say kind of Hungarian and Russian is my background.
What's the characteristic? I mean, because I don't have that background. My teachers were not Russian trained. And let me think. Well, Shebak, but that was very short, and I was just very young, and he was very philosophical, and so there was not a lot of pianistic things that I remember from his teaching. It was more about how I changed when he was there, and how I could do suddenly things better. But yeah, the Russian school and then the Hungarian school, what would you say? They're, sound, you were talking about sound production and technical approach. Is there a clear way that you could just put into words, like what they focus
There
on?
there are definitely some differences. It was different from my early upbringing with my one teacher who passed away, Svetlana Krchevinets. She was trained in a kind of a German and French, which are kind of different, but also share some similarities. And then, I learned about the Russian School of Playing when I was in my teens. And I would say, Hungarian School of Piano Playing, if we just walk all the way back to Liszt, right? I mean, he was the one who really influenced the Russian methodology with his concertizing and his technique. I mean, he was the most influential pedagogue of the 19th century. And when the Russian conservatory system was established, it was because of Liszt and Leschetizky, who brought their piano school, piano methodology, and way of playing the piano to Russia. And then, of course, it became a Russian school through the application of Russian concert pianism and music studies and so on and so forth. So I don't feel like those two are terribly far apart. There are some, idiosyncrasies in terms of sound. Just the use of arm weight and being able to control the key speed and rotation for color and for articulation. That was a lot of sort of more sophisticated technique that I studied with my teachers when I was older, Russian teachers. And Hungarian, as opposed to the training of the finger articulation on its own, which was my early training. So again, I feel like I got the best of both worlds, because for the first 10 years of my piano studies with my teacher in former Yugoslavia, it was all, put a coin on your hand and, just do your fingers, finger independence, and, don't move your hand, and being very still and very digitally aware. So, that provided great clarity and scale practices. And then, as I started to realize some of the limitations in playing virtuosic repertoire, as I was getting older and was able to play, more advanced and read more advanced repertoire, I started learning, I just serendipitously became acquainted with Russian and Hungarian piano teachers, and I ended up learning what I needed to learn. And my measure of my yearly progress was reading the Mephisto Waltz. And so, I started out when I was 12, and my eyes would cross, and I would just, very, I don't even know how old I was. Maybe I was 12 or younger. And then my annual homage to my progress was to see if I could sight read the Mephisto Waltz. And so every year, I had an anniversary Mephisto Waltz sight reading session. And I think by the time I was 14 or 15, I could play it all the way through, okay. And I thought, okay, on to next thing. What's the next thing? So, I always challenge myself and try to find what it is that I couldn't do, because I didn't know what I couldn't do. So that was, I think, the difference between my early training and my Russian and Hungarian sojourns.
It's very interesting listening to you, talking about teachers, and we always do that, as pianists, we exchange.
We all share the same story.
Yeah, we exchange ideas. When I was preparing for this webcast, I was rereading some interviews, and I came on these lectures. I shared this with Jihye before we started. Interviews with Arthur Schnabel, as who's talking about his own musical upbringing, and I found a couple of really interesting quotes, and one of them that actually relates to what you were just saying is that, and it's like one simple sentence, but he says, to project music, the technique employed has to be a technique which from the outset is used exclusively in the service of this projection. And I found this very interesting, because as you were talking, about your musical upbringings, that there was a lot of focus, on fingers and on finger technique, and I think my musical upbringing was a little bit like that. My first piano teacher was very good, but she wasn't extremely imaginative. So I ran through thousands of etudes probably. So which made my fingers, incredibly strong, but, which made kind of, the rest of my body a little bit stiff, So when I actually had to move, to the more difficult repertoire, like the Mephisto Waltz, I found it suddenly incredibly difficult, because I was not able to generate the speed, the power from my arms. And
that's exactly what happened to me. I wanted to play more virtuosic, lightning speed repertoire, and I thought, wait, no matter how hard I practice,
it's not working.
The take the arm with them. So, so I had to kind of, so I just always sought information, and I'm just so fortunate to have come across so many great pianists and pedagogues from whom I learned, and kind of cobbled together my own way of teaching and performing, which works for me.
Right. I think that eventually happens, right? Just taking different things from different teachers, and then you have to make it work for yourself. And then also when you teach it to someone else, that also changes your understanding. At least that's how it is with me, and I'm sure,
And and I think it's an excellent segue, because I was going to ask actually about teaching before we talk about your projects, because you are a very dedicated teacher. I know that you have a army of students, and and it's good, and it's really wonderful. And so I want to ask you. something that also has to do with what Schnabel has to say, after this whole kind of, more like holistic approach to piano technique. It's like, you basically use the technique, that's most suitable for the piece you have to play. It's not prescriptive. It's not like, and again, my musical education early on wasn't like that, because I had teachers who were very clear about how your hand should be and how this should be and how that should be. And even in my studies in Vienna with, I think I talked to both of you about this at least briefly, with Paul Badura-Skoda, who was wonderful, but he had such clear ideas about, so even before you started playing, he knew it was going to be wrong. And he would not hesitate to tell you, and so I learned a lot about, how he thought about music, which was extremely valuable, but in a way, I'm glad that I had other teachers after him, I'm glad, I met Mr. Frankel, for example, at Yale, because he really opened up the sound world to me the way, the Viennese pianist didn't, who was going to...
Performer. I mean, I remember hearing his Debussy preludes, and they were just magical. I had never heard anything.
And I don't think he knew quite how he was doing it, which was really amazing to me. He wasn't quite able to explain what he was doing, but it was just happening. He would sit at the other piano and somehow, magic happened. But back to teaching. If you don't mind, I'm gonna quote one more thing from Schnabel, because that's gonna take us, to something that's really close to my heart, and probably close to your heart as well. So Schnabel says about teaching. So in the past, almost every musician was a composer, teacher, and performer. Then the enormous expansion of musical activities led to an unfortunate separation of these functions. Teaching, with multitudes of students not very gifted and only moderately ambitious, was gradually simplified. I think this is an inescapable consequence of collectivism. The teachers, who naturally were not all on the same level, had to face new tasks. Rules, conventions, and standards, intelligible for persons without a helpful background, had to be established. So, and this brings us to method books and to things like this, something that, many American teachers seem to truly love. And I know that at least, Jihye and I hate with passion because... Yes. I guess what I want to ask you is, where do you see music education in the States today? Where do you see the level of the students who come to you of different ages? Do you feel that we are in a good place in America? Do you feel it could be better? And if so, how can we make it better as teachers? I know. I had to ask.
That's a big question, and thank you for asking me, because it makes me feel like I'm flattered that you think that I have something to contribute to this topic. I think one of the biggest voids, if you will, in music education for children in this country is the absence of that development of musical culture from early age. And, we have that in Europe. Like I said, I spent 10 years studying music seriously before I even entered the university, and so did you. And Jihye, you did as well. And this really benefited us. It benefited us because it gave us 10 extra years of music training and education, gave us 10 extra years of thinking about what music is and who we want to become, when we grow up as musicians, and where we want to go with all that. So, if knowledge is power, education is incredibly important, and we are missing this in the United States. And it was the same when I first came here, and I believe it's the same now as well. Even with the proliferation of preparatory divisions across the country, and certainly the level has improved simply because children and young pianists have access. So, for me as a teacher, every year I accept one gifted 6-year-old into my private studio, because I believe that that's what's missing for these young kids who are just starting. And when I say gifted, I mean someone who's willing to sit still and listen to me talk. and do what I said. But you know, I think that that's what's missing from the system is the accessibility to people like yourselves who are well educated and have a broad knowledge base, who need to bring up, who should bring up the next generation of musicians, but young students in the United States don't have access to that until they're in college. And it's just like sports, right? It's athletics. You know, by the time you're 29 or 30, if you're a tennis player, you're an old man or an old woman. And there is a lot of parallels with music and sports that way. And yet in sports, you know, there are all these programs in schools where people are trained from very young age to be
That's
athletes,
right.
and we are not, or you know, those children who are interested in music are not given the same kind of education and opportunity. So that's how I feel about it, and I think that's what needs to be done. And you know, I am doing it one child at a time, you know, when I can and how I can, and you know, so I have a small private studio of, in some cases, of kids who, you know, learned to play the piano from scratch with me and then went on to college, not being musicians, which is perfectly fine with me. I don't teach music to create the next, you know, competition winner or next great pianist. I teach music because I believe that everyone needs to know what it means to be a musician, what music is about, how complex and beautiful it is, how it makes their lives better.
Right.
And we as musicians need to be aware that we're creating a platform for the arts. So even though these kids whom I've taught privately lessons from, you know, age 6 to 16 or 17, whenever they head off to college, even though I know that they're not going to be professional pianists, they are going to be coming to concerts. They are going to go to their local symphony because they've learned that music is an important part of their life. They are going to give their children music lessons because they're going to continue to pass that on down, you know, their generations. And to me, that's a job of every musician in the world, and especially here in the United States, where we don't have that systematic education available already and organized by the government. So that was a long answer to your question.
No, but I really, yeah. And also, I guess it's just largely the society not being structured that way to support, you know, that. And then also, I think there is a lack of interest too. I just don't see a lot of parents interested in this kind of vigorous immersion kind of into classical music. And I guess if you have more of these programs, that interest could grow together. But I don't know what's first.
When I was at the Prague Festival, Piano Festival, that first year, I took my students on a weekend trip to Vienna. And they were all shocked that all the trains were named after the composers. You could take the Haydn train to Vienna or the Schubert train to Vienna. You know, they were like, oh, this is so great. You know, then we were in Vienna and we had, you know, we just absorbed everything we could, you know, went to a period performance of Mozart's Requiem in the church where he was married and where Mahler and Alma were married. And you know, we went to a couple of other daytime concerts, to a mass in the morning, to listen to organ in this particular cathedral. You know, we just had, you know, went to the museums. And we were just, you know, took whatever we could. And, you know, when you walk down Old Town Vienna, bookstores or grocery stores, they have posters of classical musicians playing a recital here or playing a recital there, or a celebration of this, you know, cellist, a chamber ensemble, organ recital. I mean, it's a way of life there, because it's Viennese national pride to highlight composers who lived and worked in Vienna, which was the center of musical scene in Europe at that time. And I was just talking to one of my students about this, that I feel that in the United States, we could do so much better of a job of celebrating our musical heritage And what we have, because that's the pathway to making music into popular culture, making classical music be part of everyone's life. And why does every child want to play Fur Elise? Because they've heard it a
Right.
thousand times, right? It's popular. That's what makes it popular. So the definition of popularity is something that happens all the time and many, many times. Repetition, 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 repetition. So that's you asked what could we do about that. Well, that would be a start, to identify classical music that we are proud of, that has been made in America, and there's certainly plenty of it. And then drive that point home over and over again. Why aren't we playing Copland symphonies at football stadiums? I don't know.
And I wonder, how much the problem maybe started, earlier. I remember hearing an interview with Arthur Rubinstein when he reflected kind of, on his experiences, with the American music scene, and he said, well, when I came here, in the early 90s, there was basically no musical scene at all, so when I played the piano, I would be, part, of a circus act, there would be like, there would be clowns before me, and jongleurs after me, and I would play ballad, in between, and he said, that was very, very disappointing. But then, he said, well, I came back, in the 30s, and the scene has completely changed. And he said, he was shocked, because of the influx of the immigrants from Europe, concert halls are being built, choral societies are being established, orchestras were excellent, at that point. So suddenly, America truly, had a very vibrant music life. There were 50 piano makers, right? At that point, everybody was buying pianos. So it was here, I mean, I wonder how much, it was maybe driven at that point, by the immigrant experience, of the Europeans, and how much maybe, Americans wanted to be like the Europeans. But maybe you're right about the fact that, the homegrown talent was never really nurtured as much as it should have been. Maybe there was just way too much dependence, on the immigrant talent, and there was plenty of it, of course, before the war and after the war.
Maybe.
And it's a little. Yeah.
Sorry, even in the 1950s, you just reminded me. Van Cliburn was a household name.
Right.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that long ago.
So then something happened in the 80s and 90s. What happened?
Oh, no, I wasn't in the States yet.
Yeah, me neither. So I don't know what happened. But just so many other things to talk about. But you were talking about your 6-year-old student that you take, and I have actually a 7-year-old now. Only one child student that I teach, and she loves when I play something like Shostakovich. Like, how is this for your new piece? And she's like, I love it. It's beautiful. That kind of thing. I think we just need more. And my son was practicing the da 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 da, the hard part from the Rite of Spring.
Yeah.
And he was just practicing it with his chopstick, looking at my
I just say that you did a very good job of singing that, because what was the joke? You can never tell what the musician is singing because they go da 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 da. You did a very good job. Yes.
Thank you.
I recognize it immediately.
Yeah. So, anyways, just what you surround the young children with, right? What they grow up listening to, and what they experience as the daily life, that matters a lot, right? So, but I never thought about how we don't celebrate enough of the American grown classical musicians and classical music. So more to do. Yeah.
And maybe, what we don't really impart enough, on the young generation of the budding musician is the fact that music is really hard. And that it takes years to attain, any semblance of mastery. And I'm sure it happened to both of you also, right? You come to a student comes to you, a new one, and he kind of says, "Oh, how do you do this? Can you teach me how to do this? How do you play the scale so fast? Can you teach me?" I said, I mean, not really. I mean, yes. I mean, if you stay for 15 years, if you stick around,
Signed here on the dotted line. You're so
So there's this kind of impatience with the or maybe just not they're not able to recognize, they're not wired to recognize that things really take a long time. And I think because as Vedrana said, and you too, and that our training was like that, we kind of knew, because we started early and we kind of knew our peers, how they grew, and we knew it was a long process. I think maybe we were impatient, but we kind of recognize in a way that you kind of progress in stages. And I feel like students in America, they want to play the Pathetique sonata, so they go from the Kalhous sonatina to the Pathetique, and it shows. It's usually terrible, right? So
But,
that wasn't a question. I was just
statement. No, but I really wanted to ask you about what you were talking about in earlier tonight. Something about the unexpected turn and good surprises that you had.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So unexpected things that happen to you when you least think that they will happen. So I direct a music series, as David mentioned at the very beginning, and for a long time now, and it has been, great experience, and I've loved doing it. But of course, when COVID happened in March, and it's a summer season, because normally during the year I don't have time to work on it, and so with academic appointments running from fall through spring, and then summer is kind of like a free time. So that was my pet project in this series, and I thought for sure we're going to have to cancel it. There is no way. And everything was changing daily, as you might remember.
Yeah, right.
We're going to be open. We're not going to be open. We're going to be in the green in 3 months. We're not going to be in green in 3 months. So it was just a complete chaos for the arts, and so for my series as well. And all the concert halls shut down. And I thought, well, I guess we'll just cancel it. And then someone put me into it was like somebody connected me with someone else who was looking to start a classical music component to so they had to adjust in COVID as well, and instead of presenting live concerts, they went virtual. And they invested a whole bunch of money in equipment.
Wow.
And they thought, okay, so we now have a platform. Do we have the music? And so they wanted classical music. And they went around and they asked all the organizations that produce classical music, like the Utah Symphony, and which is one of the most important symphonies in the United States, because there's just so few full-time orchestras. But they were on a hiatus because of COVID.
Right.
And so they asked me, and I thought, that's interesting. So I thought, why not? We'll try it. And it was tricky because I wasn't sure that the musicians would want to be together and play together. We didn't know how masks worked. We didn't know how distancing worked yet. We had ideas, but nobody was sure. And so, but what happened is that I moved the entire season. Instead of postponing it for a year, I moved the entire season online, and I used this platform. It was a collaboration. And we put on the summer season just as scheduled, once a week for 6 weeks. And everyone played as scheduled. The repertoire happened as scheduled.
Wow.
Nothing had to be changed. Now, the interesting thing is that when we moved online, I thought, I wonder if anybody's going to see these concerts, because, maybe nobody will know about them. And, we usually have a pretty good attendance, but the concert hall where we present the chamber concerts is small. It's about 300 seats, which is great for chamber music, but it's not exactly a stadium kind of situation, and appropriately so. So I thought, well, if we get 200 people, or maybe even just 100, I'll be so happy if we get 100 views for these concerts, because at least we will feel like we played for someone. It didn't just go into ether. well, to my complete surprise, the first concert got 24,000 views.
Oh my God.
Wait, it gets crazier. So then every concert after that went up. So, went from 20 to 30 to 40. So by the end of the sixth concert, the 6 weeks, we were up at 80,000.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so, and we were all kind of like, we don't know what's happening. Do people suddenly love classical music? What's going on? What's happening? And but the producers, the platform organizers, they said, well, let's keep going. Let's keep doing these classical music concerts. And I thought, well, I don't know if I can, with my obligations, with my university job and my students, I didn't know. And then kids are going on to school online, so I thought I have a daughter who I have to help get through this with you. And so I wasn't sure about it, and I said, I need a month off to think about it. And I thought about it, and I thought, okay, well, I'm not going anywhere. The borders are basically closed, and the pandemic has shut down any kind of travel. So maybe I can. And so I said, I'll do one concert a month. I can't do more than that. And that's what I have been doing since October. So October, November, December. And I actually sent you a clip of the last concert that we just did this last Wednesday, the Brahms quintet. And so, the October concert was around 100,000 views. And then the November one went to 165.
So where are they viewing this?
Online. Just online.
What, like on YouTube or Facebook or Facebook. What is the
platform? So the people who were doing the streaming, they didn't know where to stream, because they were doing it kind of as an experiment too. So they didn't set up the YouTube streaming until recently, because they too were kind of overwhelmed with what was happening. They just thought, we'll get 100 views, it'll be great.
Right.
And so they set it up on Facebook, and by the end of the year, the December concert went to like 250,000 views. It's insane. I don't, it's not any money. It's not bringing us any money.
But it's great representation of,
great representation of classical music. Yes, absolutely. So this is what I'm saying, is that I was so happy to see that people are watching classical music and find it compelling somehow, and it's wonderful for classical music. And again, it's not a money-making situation, and it doesn't matter to me. I mean, what matters is that people are seeing and hearing classical music and seeing.
That's very uplifting.
Players. It was, and I had no idea that it would happen. Nobody knew it would happen, and we don't know. Again, we don't know why. The mysteries of the internet, right?
Right. So what is this organization? What's the name of this? Because I know you're
Excellence in the Community.
Excellence in the Community.
And they were around for 20 years in Salt Lake.
Okay.
It's not like they suddenly became something, but they weren't a classical music oriented platform, and so they. That wasn't their thing. But then this summer, their director thought, well, why not? Let's try classical music. And they also didn't know, they didn't know whether Intermezzo was an experiment for them as well. They thought, we'll try it. And if it doesn't work, it's okay.
And how wonderful. Yeah. So I'm so happy to hear that, because that's one of, I think, the silver linings of this whole situation. Things like this happen, and whereas you would have had just 300 maximum people, you reached so many more. So congratulations, that's really great. I hope it continues.
I did absolutely nothing except showed up and played.
But you were ready to do that, right? And you had something that has been going on before they had this need. So I think it's a perfect match. That's just great. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I'll update you on where we are.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Well, and it seems like it's a wonderful thing, for students to see, because I talk to my current students, about, the post-pandemic world, and I realize sometimes I really don't know what the post-pandemic world will be like, because we already know that it will be different, and so there's this whole thing of preparing the new generation for the world that is going to be rather unpredictable. And I know that you teach a course on career development, and that's something that's close to your heart as well. And so I thought maybe that this could be the last thing. There's so much we could talk about, but I think, but I think this is actually important. How we draw people back into the fold. How do we bring audiences, but how do we also prepare musicians for a world that's so different from the musical world we grew up in. Jihye, in Korea, which was really infused with classical music, and and people love classical art, and Vedrana and I, in Europe, where you kind of breathe music. You don't really think about it as much because it's just there. Right. And then now I think our goal as teachers and as musicians, as artists, we play a very different role right now. So I'm wondering if you have any. Again, this is a very broad question. I'm not sure if there's a definite.
I'm gonna narrow it down actually.
Okay,
because I am having to give a talk, and some of the students asked me questions prior to the talk, and it relates directly to what you have done with Intermezzo. And the question was, if you don't mind answering, let me just pull out the question. What are the best ways to get started on making a project such as a concert series sustainable and successful? And you've done it. So I was going to ask you, how you started it, what made you start the series, and and I think that relates to what David is asking, like what are the other things that they can do besides going into academic positions or having a successful studio. So yeah, could you just share a little bit about the series?
I can, but before I talk about the series, I want to tell students who are listening that their education, their teaching and performing education, of course, is the foundation for any music work. I often encounter students who say, well, I'm not going to be a performer. Why do I have to do these things? Or, or why do I have to learn music theory if I'm a performer? Do I really need that? And why should I do music when I know that there's only a handful of teaching academic positions in the world at any given time? And why should I be a performer? I love music, but look how many great performers there are out there, and why are we doing this? So what I always tell them is that's your starting point. Your education as a performer and as a teacher is your starting point, because it's a skill that is transferable to all other music careers, and it gives you competence and credentials to apply to whatever new adventure in music you might have. And there are just dozens and dozens of jobs in the music industry that are not performing or teaching. Just so many. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States, actually. And classical music, strangely, if you look at the statistics, is not doing terribly badly. I mean, there is a lot of financial support for the performing arts. Not enough for education, but quite a bit for performing arts, and not enough, but again, it's not a negligible quantity. So, and I say this only because I want students to know that there are jobs out there. There is an opportunity for them to be self-sustained, to have self-sustained musical careers, for sure. But we can't be as naive to think that we're just going to come out of the school or win a competition and somebody's just going to hand us a job because we're so wonderful. That's just that's just not true. And it's not true because statistically there are many wonderful musicians around. I mean, every day I see and hear piano playing and other kinds of playing, but it's for pianists, just talking about piano playing. I mean, look at what you guys are doing. I mean, you're both amazing. And um, I see that and I hear that and I think, and I don't think, oh my gosh, there's not enough room for everybody. I think how wonderful that we have so much music and so much skill and education available to all of us. We can share this with the world. And that's the key. You want to share that with people around you because people are actually willing to learn and they're interested to learn and they want to know more. They just don't have accessibility. They don't know how to access it. So, as I said before, with music education, it's our job also as musicians to bring music to those who maybe wouldn't ask for it themselves, and we can. What a great product we have. Who doesn't really? If you think about it, who doesn't like music? There's a piece of music in the classical canon for everyone that would make someone love and understand classical music. So, to go back to your question about how to start a series, the way it happened for me was I was working at a East Coast festival. It's not really on the coast, but relative to the size of the United States, east in the state of New York at Chautauqua, and I had been there for 7 years, and my husband just got bored of having to spend summers in Chautauqua. Can we do something here, one of these summers so we don't have to travel all the time during the summer? And so we thought, well, what can we do? And we decided to organize a series of concerts because back then in Salt Lake City, not a whole lot was going on during the summers. And so we did, and we started with, I think, like 2 concerts that year. We established a nonprofit organization, and it turned out that there were people who wanted to come and hear this stuff during the summer in Salt Lake. And so we built a following and an audience, and we worked hard to program music that was not only satisfying to us, but that our audiences would want to come and hear. And we had at our disposal amazing musicians locally, some of whom were Utah-based, and but many who came from all over the place because of Utah Symphony. And so there was a place and there was a need, and we were willing to do the work, and it just continued to grow. And at some point, he stepped away from it, and I continued. And it's going to be our 20th anniversary.
Wow.
20 years of doing this. That's how long.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
It's happening right now online. So, another interesting thing about that, surprise thing that happened is not just the viewership, but normally I do 6 concerts during the summer. I ended up doing 9. So I did more than I normally would because the situation changed, and I expect that will be the same this year as well. So, but what I would say to someone who's starting a concert series is that there has to be, there's some guidelines for that, right? So the guideline is that you have to find a place, you have to find a day and time, you have to have consistency and a schedule, and you have to kind of develop a little bit of a brand. Maybe it doesn't have to be perfect or your final choice, but you have to start with something. So a good name helps. Some kind of a logo or a color scheme or something that people will recognize when it appears, and take advantage of the free marketing opportunities to post your information on social media and elsewhere where it's free, and people will come across it. And then you just have to commit to actually doing it for at least 3 years.
Right.
It takes between 3 to 5 years to get any new project off the ground. And so unless you're willing to commit to doing it for that long, and to not throw in the towel until at least 3 years have passed, right? Because there are going to be ups and downs. And, there might be a concert where you have only 10 people in the audience and they're your family. But that's okay. That's how things get started. All successes start small and nothing happens overnight. So that would be my advice to your student who asked, how do you start a concert series?
Great.
Patience.
Thank you so much. Yeah, right. Very good. Very good.
Well,
Yeah.
there is so much to talk about, but I'm actually realizing that we are out of time, and
Yeah.
we didn't even manage to play all the music I was hoping
Oh,
to
that's
play.
right. There were so many
But
great recordings.
well,
Yeah.
and my computer was behaving strangely today. So what I
Right.
think what I'm going to do, I will, because Vedrana has a lot of good recordings on her website. So I'm going to add some links, to this interview, because people can actually watch it later on the Prague Piano YouTube channel.
Good.
So we'll add some links.
And maybe sometime we can continue and we can talk about Beethoven.
And sometimes we can continue to talk about
That's
Beethoven,
right, yeah.
and I'm really hoping this is kind of another perks of this era, that that you're in Utah and Jihye is Florida and I'm in New York, and we can have this conversation. We would have never found time. Imagine Saturday evening, this would have never happened.
Yeah.
During a normal life, so we are fortunate in that sense, that we can have these conversations, and hopefully we'll meet in Prague at some point, and do this live,
so
which would be really nice. And I'm still hoping that Prague Festival will happen in some form this summer, although everything is so unpredictable right now. So
simply must. It's one of my favorite things I've ever done as a pianist, and I'm there for you.
Thank you. And the festival really needs you, needs all of you, needs your creative energies. Vedrana, thank you so much for being with us. Please, everybody, explore Vedrana's website. She has a lot of great information about her career, her recordings, about her teaching, and we'll have her back, and we will talk. We could really devote a program to Beethoven, because I know you have basically performed every. Because I know when you came, you were kind of in the middle of doing the sonatas, right? So I think I know you performed a couple. I think you were just learning some. I know exactly in which room you were learning them. I still remember that. So that was
Yeah, but you're doing the whole Beethoven, right? That involves piano. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. See, this is the thing. When you think you are doing you are doing something, or you are working a lot, there is always somebody who is imagining bigger and doing like more amazing things. And so because a lot of pianists would delve into the 32 sonatas project, but like that's beyond that. So so I learned so much actually by just looking at what you're doing. So thank you.
And
it's really great to meet you. Yeah,
it's just so great to meet you, and David, so great to see you always. Last time I ran into David in New York when I was
in a coffee shop. That's true. That happened almost by accident, and that's
that's nice. All right.
Well, this is a conversation to be continued. So, Vedrana, thank you very much. Jihye, thank you for joining me again.
Thank you.
So this was the Prague Piano Webcast, and looking forward to seeing you soon again. Thank you.
Joining us, everyone.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Bye.